the Tudor's Dynasty Podcast.
Today we are in Kents Cavern and I am joined by General Manager James Hull. James, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
This is an amazing cave. I've never been in anything like this in my entire life. It is absolutely beautiful. And we are here today because I want other people to know about this.
Yeah.
I mean, how many people did you say come through here every year?
We get about 70 to 80,000 people every year.
A couple, maybe like one busload. What I would love for you to do is maybe to explain to my listeners and viewers a little bit of the history of where we are today.
Yeah, of course. So Kents Cavern is Britain's oldest home. So the first people to arrive in this country found this cave in Devon and used it as a shelter and a home. The thing that makes it so unique is that not only one species of human used Kents Cavern, but 3 different species. Wow. So 500,000 years ago, we had a species called Homo heidelbergensis, who came out of Africa about 2 million years ago. We had Neanderthals, and then Homo sapiens, which is our species that used it. Yeah. So there's lots of caves all over the world, but in terms of the human side of it, the human story, Kents Cavern's got a very rich history.
It really does. And they found all kinds of animals in here as well, too. Let's talk about that.
Yeah, so Kents Cavern was very popular during the Ice Age. It was used as a shelter and a home. So we've got animals like hyenas, scimitar cats, cave lions and bears using the caves as a shelter. And then we've also got evidence of larger Ice Age animals like mammoths, woolly rhinos, Irish elk. Now, the reason they were found in the caves is because of those predators that were using Kents Cavern as a shelter would attack the mammoths outside and then drag their bodies into the caves. So, yeah.
Oh, fascinating. It was really a different time, wasn't it?
It was. And for us as humans, it was very difficult to survive during the Ice Age. So we would follow the seasons, we would follow the climate. So during the kind of colder periods, we'd move down south. And then when things warmed up, we'd move back up north. So yeah.
And where we're standing today, too, it wouldn't have looked like this originally, would it?
No. So Kents Cavern as a cave is about 2.5 million years old. But what's happened is sediment and soils filled the caves over time. So the floor level in this chamber, when the Victorians arrived, would have been roughly about this high. So it's an excavated cave.
Okay, and let's talk about how they excavated it, because it's not like they just came in here with a shovel and we're trying to move rock that way. How did that work?
So there's 2 very famous people who excavated Kents Cavern. One was called Father John McHenry, who excavated the caves in 1825. Now he was a Roman Catholic priest, and while he was excavating, he was finding evidence of extinct animals alongside human tools, which went against his belief. Back then they were convinced that it was Noah's floods that had washed all of these bones into the caves. So he never published his work. And it wasn't until a person called William Pengelly came to Kents Cavern in 1865 after reading John McHenry's journals and started this great excavation, which lasted 15 years.
Wow.
So, yeah.
And so they used dynamite, right?
They used a bit of dynamite in the caves. They used pickaxes, pitchforks, pickaxes, shovels, and a donkey called Topsy. And we think probably about 7,000 to 9,000 tons worth of soil was moved out of Kents Cavern during 15 years.
How did you learn about the donkey? Was that in the diaries?
It is, yeah. So it's in the diary. So William Pengelly was fantastic in his journal. So every day there was information being put in about what was discovered, a funny story that happened. So they were excavating in candlelight, tallow candles.
Yes.
So constantly in William Pengelly's diaries, there was information about the excavators were plunged into darkness because rodents were stealing the candles and running off. So yeah.
I love that story. That is such a great story, because you were talking about the candles, and I think what were they called? Tallow?
Tallow candles,
yes.
Yeah.
And I think I first learned about them when I did a little bit of research on the Victorian era and how they would smell indoors and how you knew those were the cheap candles, right?
That's right, yes.
And the fact that the rodents would take them off.
It's a great food source.
It is. So yeah, when they were doing the work in here, it wasn't lit up like we have it today.
No. So this is all now electrical lighting, but back then it was candles dotted around. In fact, there is places still in the caves where you can still see the candles and the arrow marks to tell the Victorians how to get out the caves. So, yeah.
Oh, there's just so much history. You know, I've been in England now for a couple of weeks and there's history all around us. Little did I know there was going to be even more history here today. I should have expected it, obviously. But just being in here, you can almost feel the millennia of history.
In theory, the history of Britain started at Kents Cavern.
It's
So,
right here.
yeah.
That is great. James, what's maybe, and I don't know if you can answer this question, what's the strangest thing anybody has asked you on a tour?
Oh, that's a very good one. I did get a very funny one a couple of weeks ago, which was, does a cave have a roof?
Oh,
and
okay.
and my reply was yes, because if it didn't, it would be called a hole. But
that's a good one. For anybody who comes to visit here, what is the takeaway that you'd want them to have?
So Kents Cavern, is Britain's oldest home. So we tell a story about the humans who used these caves as a shelter during a time in the Ice Age, which is a completely different environment to what we see today, and how Kents Cavern was a place of shelter, and it was a place that people would have cohabited along with Ice Age animals.
Oh. Is there anything that I've missed in the history that you want to share with us?
So I think one of the things is probably how our ancestors used to see in Kents Cavern. So we talked about how the Victorians used the sort of the caves with candlelight, but how did Stone Age people use the caves? You couldn't have a fire here because you'd be suffocated with smoke within a couple of minutes. So how did our ancestors explore Kents Cavern? Well, so they would have used a shell fire. So it's a scallop shell, and inside it was animal fat from prehistoric horse and moss. And you mix it together and it gives you a lantern. And the shell protects your hand.
Yeah.
And if you could imagine in the Stone Age, you would have been a tribe of 30 to 40 people. You would all have your own individual jobs. And at the end of the night, you would come into the caves and you would light 10 or 20 of these around in the chamber, and you'd be talking about your day, telling stories, playing music. This is actually a better source of light than how our Victorians used the caves 150 years ago. And this would have been used 14,000 years ago.
It just blows my mind how they had the wherewithal to understand that they could put these things together and it would burn for a long period of time.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting because we look at our ancestors and think they must have really struggled to survive. And in fact, they thrived. And this is kind of one example of actually how they thought outside the box and they considered how to get a light source into the caves.
That's so cool. I can't even tell you how cool I think this is. I never knew. And I'm so glad that you explained this today because, how did they light up the inside of the cave at night?
Yeah.
Wow. James, oh my gosh, this has been so enlightening today to be here with you. If somebody wants to come visit,
yes,
are you open year round?
We are open every day apart from Christmas Day and Boxing Day. And we go on a guided tour of Kents Cavern, which takes just under an hour. So you go around with one of our experienced and entertaining tour guides who will tell you the story, but also demonstrate some of the techniques that we use.
That's great. And you have a website too, right?
We do have a website, kents-cavern.co.uk.
Perfect. And make sure you bring a sweater or something because it is a little chilly in here. James, thank you so much for meeting with me today.
Not at all. A pleasure. Thank you.
Now I'm joined by Linda with Raking Light. Linda, welcome.
Hello.
Thank you for being here. Let's talk a little bit about the work that you're doing here at Kents Cavern.
Well, what we're working on is a project to record the historic graffiti in the cavern, starting with our William Peter here, William Peter 1571, who is quite possibly the gentleman who started everything.
That's fascinating.
The writing on the walls in here. Because in Bears Den here, which was our pilot project, to see how far we could get recording graffiti in a week, we started working here, and we were working from William Pengelly's diaries to start from. Because William Pengelly, being an archaeologist, he recorded everything he saw. He wasn't just digging in the ground, he was actually recording what he saw on the walls. And so when he noticed that there was graffiti and his workmen mentioned graffiti, as he was digging through to get here, he specifically instructed them not to touch anything with something written on it. So he was actually preserving what we really have here as the top level of graffiti, top level of archaeology in Kents Cavern. And so it has a rich history from prehistoric times right through to what is comparatively, relatively recently, in the early modern period.
Right, relatively.
Yeah, relatively. But in this chamber here, it's quite probably at the time this would have been the furthest accessible point, the reasonably accessible point in the cave. Would have come in through a crawling height passage. You wouldn't walk in like we did today. They'd have come crawling through into this chamber, which was an achievement then. Now, 1571, you've got a tallow candle, and you arrive here with something as amazing as this. And William Peter, probably, as most people would have had in those days, a pocket knife of some description, wrote his name on the stalagmite boss behind us up there.
Wow.
And so he would have been at that level. Everything below here was excavated by Pengelly. And William Peter wrote on the curve of the boss. So his name started out slightly small with the W, and as he went slightly around the curve in the corner, it expanded. So the letters at the end of his name were bigger than where he started.
It's not easy to write that way, is it?
It isn't easy to write, and even now it's not easy to photograph either.
It's not.
Our work is to try to get a photographic record of the graffiti in the cave, because in places down here, we've got active stalagmite growth. So the stalagmites that you see on the walls are starting in places to come down and cover what's underneath it. So it's really important to get a good photographic record of what we have here in the cave, to know what's at risk, and when we do lose things to that kind of natural activity in the cave, we still have a record of what's underneath it.
When nature takes over again.
That's right. Unfortunately, on this boss, it's not active these days. You can see it's dry, there's no water flowing down it. So probably William Peter will last for several hundred more years.
Oh, let's hope.
Yep, let's hope so.
Such a great piece of history.
Yeah. He started it all, and then other people followed. You know, the principle today, you can still see graffiti. If you see graffiti appear on a wall, the next day you might see a bit more and a bit more. And so people were following his lead, quite possibly after, as you do, you go out, you talk about what you've done, tell your friends about it, other people come in, come in with the candles, come through to here. It's an achievement for them. They write their names on the wall. They write a date.
Yeah.
I mean, in graffiti terms, you go to the top of the class if you write your name and the date. We'd prefer a full address and postcode for research purposes, but they didn't do that.
Unfortunately.
That's the point at which we have to turn things over to our genealogists and historical researchers on the project, which isn't my side of things. I'm the caver.
You're the
I do
caver.
the holes in the ground and things written on the walls.
Yes. How did you get into caving?
Long story, probably family reasons. My grandfather was a caver in Yorkshire. And I think as a child, I just grew up reading Enid Blyton books, and they were always going down holes in the ground. A bit like your Hardy Boys.
Yes,
Oh, yes. So I always wanted to go down holes in the ground. I never saw one that I didn't want to grab a torch and burrow into as far as I could.
Wow.
So when I came to university in Bristol and joined the caving club there, started caving properly.
You're kind of an explorer yourself, really.
I like holes.
And it's so brave of you, too, because when they shut off the lights in here earlier, it kind of scared me a little bit. So I can't imagine them working in here hundreds of years ago.
Yeah, candles were fairly fickle. You got better light off the shell lights. Without a shadow of a doubt, you've got better lasting lights and longer lights.
Yeah.
And so in many ways, lighting took a downhill.
It did.
Downhill curve. Until we started using electric lights. And even those were fairly fickle in the early days.
Well, Linda, if there's something that you would want to leave with my listeners and viewers about the work that you do, what would that be?
Oh, that's a tricky one. I think for us, the work is in the human interest in the cave. That people were doing this, they were recording their achievements in their way at the time. I mean, obviously, we don't encourage people to write on cave walls today. That's definitely frowned on. We've got other ways of doing it.
So I can't scribble my name in one of these stones?
I'm really sorry. No, there isn't a sort of sneaky Linda somewhere on the walls.
I'll put Rebecca was here.
If there is, it wasn't me. But we have other ways of doing that now. We can record our presence here by means of a selfie, or we can film it, we can put it on the internet. But for the people like William Peter who are writing that, and all the people that followed him, and we have women's names in the cave as well, so this wasn't just the men who were doing it.
Right.
It's great to actually be able to record that, and hopefully as part of this project to learn more about the use of the caves from that period onwards. It may or may not, when we finish the research, we may be able to see an expansion of names and dates with the growth of tourism in Torquay.
Yeah.
There's a lot you can do to correlate the names that are written on the walls with what's happening outside, with what's happening in the area, all sorts of things. So we don't really know where we're going with this at the moment, other than we're taking the photos, we're gathering the information, and then in most cases, like research, we'll see where it leads us.
How fun.
Yeah.
If people want to look into your work, do you have a website?
We do. We've got a website, Raking Light, which is www.rakinglight.co.uk.
Perfect. And we'll make sure to include the links to your website.
Thank you very much.
In the show notes as well. Linda, thank you so much for meeting with me today.
Thank you.
Okay, here we are again at Kents Cavern, and behind me is the entrance that we went through from the video you saw before. And now I am joined by Rebecca, who is an archaeologist with Raking Light. Rebecca, welcome.
Thank you very much.
Good name, by the way.
Oh, it's a great name. All the best people have it.
They really do. They really do. Why don't we start off by you just kind of explaining a little bit your part in this whole thing?
I joined Linda's organisation, Raking Light, having met Linda at a graffiti conference in 2018, because although my main interest is landscape archaeology and the wide open spaces, actually I do most of my work in standing buildings and preserving historic architecture. And I had noticed lots and lots of graffiti and had started collecting it. And so naturally we bonded together over a conference, and she said, you must join us. So here I am, part of the crew doing the caves.
Yeah, the graffiti is so interesting.
It is completely gripping. The more you look, the more you find, and you get so many intermingled layers of human activity, and you find the same symbols going on and on and on. And they change meaning slightly as people use them, but clearly some of these symbols are just a fortunate thing, and they've been a fortunate thing for thousands of years, and people are still using them.
Yeah, we were talking earlier about graffiti and how one person starts and other people go back and they add to it.
They absolutely do. It's you can imagine people tagging walls with spray paint now, and somebody does a small tag in a corner, and suddenly you've got a whole blossoming and a picture on the wall, and people are filming it as the street art.
Yeah. What is it about these caves that interests you the most?
I think it's the fact that they're almost an unsung wonder. We know, and I know as an archaeologist, that they're very important from the paleontological and archaeological perspective. And we absolutely applaud the work that Pangeli did, because he was a proper archaeologist in the days when a lot of people were just shoveling stuff out of the ground and rummaging around for pots.
Yeah.
But it's the fact that because it's been a commercial enterprise, a lot of people have poo-pooed it and said, oh no, this is absolute rubbish, nonsense. But once you get in amongst it and start looking, it is so much more than that. It is really an important and fascinating place, and I would absolutely recommend people come and have a look for themselves.
It is fascinating.
Yeah.
You have some interesting papers behind your back that we have to talk about, right?
I am concealing evidence here. I know you had a look at the William Peter signature just a short while ago. And I've been doing a little bit of background work, trying to work out which of the numerous William Peters it might be. And a slight background to this is that around the southwest of England particularly, and more generally across the country in earlier times, but particularly in the southwest of England, a traditional naming pattern was in place where people in families were named after ancestors in a particular style. And you end up then with numerous people in the same family all having the same name.
Right.
So with the Peters, the names were John and William. So William Peter's father was called John. His older brother was called John. His slightly younger brother was called John. And his cousin, who also became his brother-in-law, was called John. William Peter is the famous one. He has his Wikipedia page. We know about him. But we also know that he was very, very old by the time the cave inscription was made. He had a very bad leg. He was probably travelling around in the 16th century equivalent of a wheelchair. So probably he wasn't the person crawling underground. The next two suspects are his grandson, also William, but he wasn't born yet. He wasn't born for another 4 years. And finally, we pegged down a nephew. Now, the nephew is interesting. William Peter, the nephew, was born at Tornewton, which is the same house that William Peter the Famous was born at. They both lived a very short distance from these caves, from some other caves in their childhood. William Peter the Famous went to London and made his career and worked at court and didn't really come back again. William Peter the nephew grew up, married a lady, beg your pardon. His father had married a lady who belonged to the Ridgway family. Now they are important. This is a digression, but they're important because they were the people who owned this land.
Okay.
They owned the caves before Lord Holden. So Miss Ridgway married Mr. Peter, and their son was called William Peter. He is the nephew of the famous person.
Gotcha.
He must have known the caves, which were within a field's distance of the house where he grew up. What seems likely is that he came to see his cousins at the caves and said, "Why aren't you in those caves?" And the boys went into the caves, and he wrote his name there. Thomas Ridgway asked William Peter the nephew to be one of his executors and left him money to cover his expenses and troubles. And William Peter the Famous left him money because, of course, he was his nephew. So there is that. They link together through the nephew. And I suspect that it is the nephew, as a young man, who in 1571 also inherited money from one of his uncles and got married. So he would have occasion to write 1571 on a wall. He was feeling pleased with himself.
Right.
So I think he's the most likely candidate. He's certainly connected. He's definitely family. He lived near to caves, and he's young and fit and healthy and full of the joys of life.
Yeah, it's just so cool to think that there's Tudor graffiti in such an ancient cave.
Oh, incredible. And to feel that there's this human impulse. I'm feeling the lad. I am really clever. I'm going to write my name on that wall.
Yes, I love that. Such a great story. What's been the most fun part of this job for you here?
I think getting into caves, bizarrely, because being a landscape specialist, I tend to stand out in wide open fields, look at lumps and bumps, and then go and look at maps and say, aha. To crawl in underground and actually look closely at things that are completely out of my comfort zone and out of my world. It's been absolutely fascinating. It's been a joy.
Oh, that's great. Isn't it so true, though, when you go outside your comfort zone, how a whole new world opens up to you?
Yes. Yes, it has been totally fascinating. And the more I see and the more I experience with Linda, the better it gets.
Yeah. Is there anything that I haven't covered today, Rebecca, that you want to make sure that we get out there?
I think probably that you should definitely come and look at these caves, but also that people should look around and have a search for some graffiti. Get your torch out, hold it at an angle, see what you can see on old walls, because it's surprising. Once you find the angle and the light, you will see more than you ever thought. It's sometimes you get the light on a wall and it looks like a blank wall, and you shine the light across it and it's like reading a newspaper.
Yeah.
It's quite extraordinary.
The graffiti is everywhere.
It is.
In this country, and I didn't realize that until my travels, and my travel buddy Nigel has been showing me at all these different churches we've been at some of the graffiti in those, and I probably would have walked right by it had he not pointed it out.
Absolutely. It's so easy to miss. You have to use your eyes and get that torch.
Yes, we're going to have to do that, right, Nigel? So if somebody wants to get a hold of you or find some of your work, where can they find you?
I am publishing with Linda on the Raking Light site.
Perfect. And we will have the links to that in the show notes as well. Rebecca, thank you so much for being here with me today.
Thank you so much.
The Tudors Dynasty Podcast.